Months had passed since Mark's brutal battle with Conquest, but the scars of the fight lingered. His body had healed, but his injuries were a reminder of how close he had come to losing. To aid his recovery, metal casts had been placed over his damaged hand, arm, and leg. Despite the pain, he refused to rest. The world needed help, and he had a duty to uphold. Giant craters and ruins stretched across the landscape, remnants of battles that had torn cities apart. Mark spent his days assisting with the cleanup efforts, moving debris and ensuring survivors received aid. But as he worked, a sudden force crashed into him, sending him flying through the rubble. A monstrous, dinosaur-like figure loomed over him. Its sharp teeth gleamed, and its reptilian eyes were filled with intelligence. "You think you're helping," the creature growled, "but you're not." Mark was taken aback. He had fought countless villains with selfish motives, but this one spoke with conviction. The creature claimed that destruction wasn't a tragedy, it was an opportunity. The leveled cities would create jobs, forcing economic growth and technological advancement. The world would recover, stronger than before. Mark wasn't interested in theories. He fought for the people who had lost their homes, their families, their lives. He wasn't about to let some self-righteous monster justify suffering. With a powerful punch, he struck the creature, but the force shattered the metal cast on his hand. The creature barely flinched before lunging forward, sinking its teeth into Mark's arm. Pain shot through his body, but he retaliated, landing another devastating blow. This time, the creature staggered, its form shifting and shrinking. Mark watched in shock as the monstrous being melted away, revealing a man beneath the scales. His face was pale, his expression dazed. He looked at Mark with a mixture of exhaustion and fear. I need help," he admitted, his voice weak. "I don't know if I can control it." Mark clenched his fists. He had seen this before, villains pretending to be victims, monsters begging for mercy after wreaking havoc. His blood boiled with anger, and for a fleeting moment, he considered ending it right there. Before he could act, the Guardians of the Globe arrived. Robot took one look at the scene and immediately assumed the worst. "Mark," he said, voice tense. "The Guardians can take it from here." Mark looked down at the trembling man, his own rage cooling into something more complex. He had been ready to kill, but something inside him hesitated. Maybe it was pity, maybe it was exhaustion. Whatever it was, it had stopped him. Later that evening, he arrived at Eve's house, still troubled by what had happened. He shared his thoughts with her, admitting that for a split second, he had been willing to kill the man, but something had held him back. Eve listened, understanding his turmoil, but also knowing there was nothing she could say to erase his doubts. Instead, she focused on what lay ahead. Tonight was important. Mark was finally going to have dinner with her parents. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The meal began in awkward silence, broken only when Betsy, Eve's mother, asked a simple yet loaded question. "So, Mark, what does your father do?" Eve stiffened. Mark felt a chill creep up his spine. Her father's expression darkened as he leaned forward. "His father," he said, his voice laced with bitterness, "is Omni-Man." Betsy immediately tried to smooth over the situation, but the damage was done. The topic shifted, but the tension never fully faded. After dinner, Eve's father, Adam, pulled Mark aside. He offered him a cigar, which Mark politely declined. Then, in a moment of unexpected candor, Adam thanked him for dating Eve. At first, Mark was caught off guard by the sentiment. But then, Adam continued, veering into uncomfortable territory. He spoke about purity, about how important it was for women to remain untouched before marriage. He even went into disturbing detail about his own wife. Mark stood there, stunned, as Adam went on and on. By the time the conversation ended, Mark felt sick to his stomach. He walked back inside, his face pale. Eve noticed immediately. "What was my dad saying to you out there?" Mark shook his head. "Nothing important." The next morning, he and Eve visited the warden of Stronghold Penitentiary to negotiate the terms of the Invincible Incorporated contract. The warden was wary, hesitant to commit. Eve, ever the strategist, reassured him that world-threatening crises sometimes took priority over personal clients. Initially, the warden offered a 6-month free service period. Mark was willing to accept, But Eve wasn't. She countered, pushing for 3 months instead. The warden, though reluctant, eventually agreed. As they left, Mark brought up Eve's powers, noting how they had been acting up. She dismissed his concerns, insisting that everything was fine. To prove her point, she suggested involving Oliver in their reserve business. When they were flying, Oliver was already waiting. He had changed, his appearance had shifted, and he now resembled an adolescent male. His new costume, designed by Art, fit him well. "Debbie's out with Paul," he mentioned casually. "So the house is ours for now." Meanwhile, in the desolate expanse of the Mojave Desert, something stirred. Conquest, once thought dead, slowly opened his eyes. His body, though battered and scarred, still pulsed with power. He had survived. With almost no effort, he broke free from the 400-ton prison that had held him. His body, naked and raw from his wounds, rose into the air. As he ascended into orbit, he looked down at the earth beneath him, and he smiled. Back on the ground, Cecil's heart pounded as alarms blared. Conquest had escaped. Elsewhere, a new threat was growing. The Sequids had spread further, their influence infecting more and more humans. Their invasion was imminent. That night, back at Eve's house, Mark knocked on her bedroom door. "Eve," he called. From inside, her voice was muffled. "Go away." Concerned, he lingered for a moment before turning away. Inside, Eve sat alone, her hands trembling. Tears welled in her eyes as she stared down at the undeniable truth. She was pregnant. It all made sense now. Her powers fluctuating, her exhaustion, the strange feeling in her body. But the realization brought a wave of fear crashing over her. She wasn't ready, and she had no idea how to tell Mark. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Invincible, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into your favorite comics. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this chapter and what you're excited to see next. See you in the next video.